things set up and making it all happen. And I just have to comment on that Larry King thing. I was talking about the ridicule factor, right? Did you notice the images on the screen? That's the essence of the problem, and that's what we're up against. So just to tell you what my purpose is, I'm actually a journalist. Just a regular old journalist. I covered lots of subjects for many years. I co-produce and co-host a radio program in the Bay Area on KPFA Radio, which is an investigative news program and just covers news, progressive news, but news. I published for many years as a freelance writer in lots of different mainstream media. And in 1999, and I had a personal interest in UFOs for quite a while, but in 1999, this French report came out of France. I don't know how many of you have heard about the COMETA report. And those of you who have seen Out of the Blue know something about it. And I recognized as a journalist that this was a newsworthy report because of the people that wrote it and because of the conclusions that they drew. And I decided that I would see if I could combat this ridicule factor, which I was very aware of. And I thought that if anything was ever going to make it into mainstream media, this was it. And I'm going to talk to you in a little while about the COMETA report a little bit more, because the first story that I wrote was for the Boston Globe, and it was about that report. But I just want to kind of let you know that as a journalist, I have a very narrow kind of approach to this subject matter. A lot of people in this room have had personal experiences, incredible sightings. They have done a lot of reading, have a lot of different relationships to the issue, a lot of insights that are unique to them. And I have this kind of narrow approach that I'm following as a journalist to try to bring credibility to the issue. And it doesn't mean that I don't respect and appreciate everybody's experiences. I really do on a personal level. I have to be careful how I present the issue. And my job is to try to bring a certain kind of credibility to it that will be so that it can be taken seriously by the policymakers, by members of Congress, by scientists, by the people that I believe really have the potential of changing the secrecy that shrouds this issue and of being able to bring it forward a little bit more. And the way that I've decided to try and do that is through the mainstream media and trying to bring a certain aura of credibility to it. In order to do that, I'm limited in what I can write about. That's why this COMETA report was so important, because it's like this by official people that the media will listen to. So I'm limited in what I can write about. I can only bring forward the most very credible people, government documents that have not been leaked, but that are Freedom of Information Act documents. I can't make any claims that can't be substantiated. A lot of this stuff can't be substantiated, even though it's probably true. So I'm limited right there. And I also have to be careful that I don't say things that make people uncomfortable, because I'm trying to reach an audience that's different than the one sitting here. I'm trying to reach an audience that is very skeptical, that doesn't know anything about the subject matter, and that basically thinks the whole thing's a joke. So in order to do that, I can't say things that make them uncomfortable. And lots of times that means I can't even talk about the possibility that these things could be extraterrestrial. I can let other people do that, and that's one reason why I like this French report also, because you have admirals and generals and incredible people making that statement. But even that word extraterrestrial, has a hard one for people to deal with in Washington. So I just want you to know before I start that I'm trying to share with you what it's like as a journalist to take this on and what it's like to deal with that particular world, which is very different than what we're all used to. And so I had to start as a journalist to find a way to present this stuff that was acceptable. One of the problems is that the word UFO, we're not clear about really what it means. It was originally defined by the Air Force in the 50s, and they were the ones that coined the phrase, by the way. Any airborne object which by performance, aerodynamic characteristics, or unusual features does not conform to any presently known aircraft or missile type, which cannot be positively identified as a familiar object. The point being that the actual definition is that it's unidentified. We don't know what it is. That's from the 50s. This is another definition by a scientist, a NASA research scientist named Richard Haynes. He's coined another term for it, unidentified aerial phenomena, that should be plural, UAP, because a lot of scientists have trouble even using the word UFO. And his definition is the same, basically, it's just a little wordier. The problem is that the culture the term tends to mean alien to people. You know, people think, when they say, do you believe in UFOs, right? Are UFOs real? People are really asking, are alien spacecraft real, right? Do you believe there are alien spacecraft here? So we have a problem from square one with the terminology. A UFO is not, by definition, an alien spacecraft. It's something that we can't explain. So just to share with you, so I have to deal with that reality all the time. And look how basic that is, right? I mean, it's the kind of thing I have to be concerned with as a journalist. And the scientific community is very concerned about the terminology, and we have discussions all the time about whether we can change it and what we can do about it. The other thing is descriptions of what UFO or UAP are, what they look like. The material that I work with on that is just official descriptions of what they see. It's not interpretations. And the descriptions, I mean, to me, this material is enough to validate the reality of something that is likely from another world. We don't need to do a whole lot more. But there's nothing in any of these descriptions. This is General Nathan Twining. I mean, I don't know if I should take the time to read them out loud. Maybe you can read them while I'm talking. You know, they describe extraordinary maneuverability, all the things we know that exist, incredible speeds. These are both from the early days in the 50s when they were, of course, very perplexed about this phenomena. And they're describing these extraordinary characteristics. And so this is the kind of thing that when I write about the subject, and this is the kind of thing that the French group did, we can describe these characteristics. The French group that I wrote the Boston Globe made this statement, that 5% of all sightings, they narrowed it down to 5%, seem to be completely unknown flying machines with exceptional performances that are guided by unnatural or artificial intelligence. Now, when you get statements coming from people of this caliber, like that, I don't know why that isn't enough to make the whole world and all the journalists in the world want to figure this thing out, but it doesn't seem to do the job. This is another one, description by scientist Richard Haynes. He was with NASA Ames. Hundreds of reports suggest that these objects are associated with a very high degree of intelligence, deliberate flight control, and advanced energy management. What does that mean? Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So this group, the COMETA, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about them in a minute. We get into the question of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And these are various statements that have come forward suggesting that, you know, as a journalist, I can maybe suggest that this is a valid hypothesis, and maybe some people can handle that. But it's really a hypothesis, and that's as far as it can go. And I just wanted you to see that back in the 50s, the FBI put forward statements that suggest that they weren't from this world. Richard Haynes, again, says that he doesn't presume that they are extraterrestrial or they're not. The data has to speak for itself. That's the position that scientists generally take, even the ones that really have more insight than they might let on. They will take the position that we don't know what they are. They could be extraterrestrial if they're bold enough to say that. And then the COMETA group made very strong statements that the ET hypothesis was by far the most feasible. And I really love this thing that Lord Hill Norton said. He's a five-star admiral who was formerly chief of the defense staff in Britain, which means he's the equivalent of Donald Rumsfeld in Britain. And he says that he agrees with the conclusions of the COMETA report that the physical reality of UFOs is under the control of intelligent beings. And he says, it seems to me that the position of even a few years ago is now reversed, and that anyone who does not believe it should be required to prove why they do not, rather than the other way around. This is a very important, I mean, when you get the head of the defense in Britain saying something like that, it doesn't seem to change things. So anyway, this report came out, and we're going to play a little clip from this movie Out of the Blue that talks about the COMETA report, because I thought it'd be interesting for you to see it, because it's a nicely produced piece rather than listen to me talk. And you'll get a sense of why this report is so important, and then we'll talk about the story that I wrote about it. So I think Jordan's going to roll this little clip.
Paris, 1999. The most important UFO study in recent decades is made public. This was presented to the President and Prime Minister of France, urging diplomatic action with the U.S. through the European Union. The report was compiled by the COMETA group, which investigated over 500 UFO cases from around the world.
This report, which came from a high-level group of French military officers primarily, as well as some scientists, is the most strongly worded pro-UFO document ever written in any language that has been made public by a group of this stature.
The COMETA group consists of generals and admirals of the French military, as well as top-level scientists, such as André Lebeau, director of CNES, the French equivalent of NASA, General Bernard Norlin, former commander French Tactical Air Force, and Jean-Claude Ribe, the former director of the observatory at Lyon, France.
The title of the report is UFOs and Defense, What Must We Prepare For? Now it's 92 pages of text after that title.
The COMETA group received data collected by numerous scientific agencies. Much of its content was based on reports from military and civilian pilots. This official document was an internal military investigation that was never intended for the general public.
In this report, they say, in effect, UFOs are real. Ergo, the extraterrestrial hypothesis may in some cases be the best or only real answer and cannot be ignored. They are technological. They do things that we probably can't do. And all that being said, this obviously constitutes a major concern for global defense and security.
When the report was completed, it was given to a number of leading French journalists. One of these was Bernard Tunel, the editor of VSD.
VSD is a French weekly magazine like Time Life. We are a journal press publication. It's not specialized in UFO sightings at all.
The COMETA group allowed VSD to publish the report, provided it was not manipulated in any way.
If the public was aware of the COMETA report, then the COMETA report was not going to disappear in any kind of official or semi-official dark hole, so to speak. Then the COMETA report became a public fact, and it remains a public fact.
To date, the report has not been officially published outside of France. And so far, only one article, published in the Boston Globe, has appeared in the U.S. press.
I applied a very high standard to the story because of its controversial nature. I was basically retelling what the generals and the other people had concluded in their report. I looked at government documents that dealt with the issue of national security and UFOs, which was what the generals were dealing with in France.
Despite her thoroughness, Leslie Kean encountered much resistance in getting the story published.
I went to many papers, many of whom I published with in the past. People laughed, hung up the phone. The subject matter is ridiculed in the media. And so even though I was dealing with facts in this article and high-level journalism, they weren't interested because of the subject matter. This was really frustrating because I thought this was an extremely important story, and I know that it was newsworthy.
Most Americans have never heard of it. The group hasn't published an English translation that anybody can get a hold of. And they seem to be on the trail of saying, hey, you Americans, you're holding back technology that you've learned from flying saucers from your allies. So it's a message to the Pentagon, not to the public. They know the Pentagon knows they're real. So it's an important report for what it says. No other report with names, with people with excellent cases, this is not anonymous reporting now, has come close to taking as strong a stand that some UFOs are extraterrestrial spacecraft.
So that was the report that that guy Bernard Tunel, who was in there briefly, gave me an advanced English translation of, and that was you can see why I thought it was a news story. I worked really hard to get the story published, and it's a long story, but as I said, the media, nobody was interested, and these are people I'd published with for years on other subjects. The Boston Globe I'd published about 6 stories with, and this editor was really an open-minded person, but it was touch and go for 3 months. Usually when I submitted a story, it would be a week or 2 and it would appear. 3 months I had to work with this person. You know, a couple times she said, we're not going to do it, it's over. She tried to put ridicule into it. I had to delicately persuade her to sort of, let's change this one little sentence here and there. She edited the thing highly, and, you know, We wrote our own headlines and all this stuff, and finally, and it came out 3 months later. So, I didn't know until the week, the day almost, whether it was even going to make it. And it just shows you the kind of fear that people have in the media about the subject matter. And she was an open-minded person, and it was, anyway. So I'm gonna talk to you a little bit later about what I think I've learned about what's behind some of this ridicule that's in the media. And I'm just going to go through a couple of other things quickly, and I don't know what, we can talk at the end about any questions or other stuff you might want to talk about. But anyway, I think it was a breakthrough to do that story because it showed that the mainstream media was willing to run a serious investigative piece. And I covered a lot more than the COMETA report. It was long. There's copies of it in the back. And I talked about national security issues because that's what they were concerned about in their report, and a lot of things. The second story that I did about a year later was about pilots and pilot encounters with UFOs. Dr. Richard Haynes from NASA Ames, he's a retired aerospace expert, has been collecting cases for about 3 decades. And he wrote a study about cases about 100 cases that involved aviation security issues, aviation safety. And he's raising the issue of aviation safety because in these 100 cases, the objects actually affected the airplanes. 56 near misses where pilots had to dive or maneuver the plane in sudden ways, to avoid collision. Objects that paced right alongside the aircraft off the wings. Other objects that disabled equipment within the aircraft. They would lose their communication. Their compasses would go haywire. They'd be pulled off course. I mean, all these things. Nothing as ever harmful has happened. There's no sense, and he says this in the report, that there's any, quotes, intention or hostile intent or anything like that. It's just the closeness to the phenomena has an effect. And so that, again, was something as a journalist, because it was written by a scientist from NASA Ames, and it was a 100-page study. I was able to write about that. And the articles in the back, we can talk more. I talk about a lot of different cases and the implications for aviation safety. There's just one case that I wanted to show you guys because I think pilots are among the most credible people. They're right up there. They're trained to recognize things in the sky. They're serious people. They take their passengers' lives in their hands. They have no reason to make up stories. It's terrible. The ones that do report these things are ridiculed. Most of them never even reported. So, who can you trust if you can't trust pilots, right? And I just wanted to briefly show you this. This was a handwritten report by a captain named Phil Schultz. He was a TWA captain who in 1981 was flying over Lake Michigan. This was in broad daylight. And he had extensive experience, years and years of flying experience. He was 54 years old. He was a U.S. Navy fighter pilot in the Korean War. He didn't believe in UFOs for like 2 seconds. They were just out of the question for him. So Dr. Haynes researched his case. And this is his own writing. This is this serious pilot, right? Here's what he puts in writing that he saw, and you can see it right here. A large, round, silver metal object descended into the atmosphere from above and to the left of my airplane to about 40,000 feet overhead and passed off to my left. And here are some pictures that he drew, and I'm going to show you again in a minute a better diagram. I just want to give you a sense of the reality of this and the caliber of the people that we're talking about. Here's the second page of his report. Again, handwritten, and what's extraordinary about this is this right here, where it says grapefruit. The question is, how large did the object appear when held at arm's length? Usually UFO sightings are like a penny, or less if you're lucky. The object was so close that it was the size of a grapefruit held at arm's length. So if you want to visualize what that would be, you can imagine you can see a lot of detail on something that big. That's unusually big. And the question again, are you certain of your answer? Very sure, he says. And this is my favorite, one of my most favorite documents of any that I've ever looked at. This was in the daylight, as I said. What distinguishable details did you see on or nearby the object? It was sharply defined, but he says he saw darker porthole-like areas. So he was actually able to see windows on this disk. And what I love the most is this. Atmospheric effects, a bending of the atmosphere. Now this is not some guy who studies time travel or warping of space or watches the X-Files. I don't even know what he means by that. I don't know what he saw that would make him write that. But I think it's utterly fascinating that he observed around the craft something he called a bending of the atmosphere. Let's, think about what that might mean. I don't know, but it certainly suggests something from another world, to put it mildly. So that's, and then down here, what do you think it is? What do you think this object was? He writes spaceship. And there's another famous case that happened in 1986 over Alaska, which some of you may have heard about. And this was a very similar case, a daylight sighting. It was really close. This was a Japanese pilot. And he, too, used the word spaceship to describe what he saw. So here's just quickly, when after this event happened, Dr. Haynes went into, how do we get this? Okay. He went into the plane, nope, on the ground with the pilot, with Captain Schultz. And they sat there, and Schultz put his hands right up against the window, and they made this diagram absolutely to scale. That's the middle of the plane right here. So it's the left-hand side of the cockpit. And this is to scale as he saw it. The thing comes in, it kind of does a few little flips and goes off. So I just wanted you to see dozens and dozens of cases like this. You know, he's got thousands of them. I don't know if they're all quite this good, but I think it's news. I'm not going to talk about this very much, but I did a story about crop circles, which is another thing I'm really interested in. We don't really have time to talk about it. But it was basically looking at the scientific studies that have been done on crop circles. And last summer when Signs came out, you remember that movie? There was a flurry of media coverage, and it was just some of the most atrocious media coverage I've ever seen on anything. You know, I mean, it was just all about the hoaxers and the planks and the boards and blah, blah, blah. And nobody talked about the science, and there's been a lot of good science done on this. There's maybe 1 or 2 articles that touched on it. 2020 did this big news show, with Barbara Walters, and they didn't even, not 1 second on these studies that show that some of these formations are definitely anomalous. I mean, they prove it, but they could not have been made with planks and boards. And my article talks about studies and very incredible scientists who have been able to make the case for that. So I think crop circles are really hard for the media because they're really in your face. They're physical. They're right there, right? And in some ways, I think the coverage is worse for crop circles than it is for UFOs. At least UFOs are these nebulous things in the sky. They can't handle the crop circle thing. There's one right now in the Bay Area just last week. And the San Francisco Chronicle did the worst story on it. I was just astounded. It was just, I don't know, they're just not educated. I mean, the guy went there and he wrote about all the New Agers that were sitting there grooving on the energy, and that was the whole article. And he basically made it into a joke, and it was front page in the newspaper. So that's what we're up against. All right. Well, we'll just talk a little bit about the ridicule factor, and then we'll take a break. Because I'm going through this fast so we can have plenty of time to have discussions. Over the years, the 4 years that I've been trying to get these stories in the media, so I've come up against the ridicule factor, and people ask me a lot, what's it like, and why is there this ridicule in the media? And I've been trying to sort of get an intuitive sense of why there's this ridicule there. And I've sort of come up with a bunch of possible, it's really a mixture of a lot of factors, I think. And every journalist, every newspaper and editor is different. But I wonder how many people have ever heard of the Robertson Panel. This is really fascinating. There was this, in 1953, the CIA, this is the cover of the report, they picked a bunch of scientists, hand-picked them, and they convened the scientific panel to study the UFO phenomena. They wanted them to address what they can do about all these reports that are coming in, and maybe it's a national security problem, and maybe the Russians are going to take advantage of it, and everybody's all distracted by UFOs, and we just got to get the public to calm down. And so they got these scientists together, which, as I said, were hand-picked for the job by the CIA. So they knew ahead of time what they wanted them to conclude. And there's a long report that was written. They looked at a bunch of evidence for about 3 days, which isn't nearly enough time. This report was very secret. It was never released. The results were never released, but except years later from the Freedom of Information Act. But you'll see right here, they wanted to they wanted to set up a program of training and debunking, a broad educational program. All concerned agencies, that means all the various intelligence agencies, the Defense Department, anybody that was worried, the Air Force, anybody worried about UFOs. And here you see in black and white that they decided they needed to have a debunking policy. And then here, they hope that the debunking aim will result in a reduction in public interest in flying saucers, which today evokes a strong psychological reaction. It's all psychological. This education could be accomplished by mass media such as television, motion pictures, and popular articles. And one more line here. Here they talk about mass communication techniques, using advertising expert. Arthur Godfrey might be able to help out. Let's use Walt Disney, animated cartoons, motion picture films, training films. And then the big policy was to use true cases showing first the mystery and then the explanation. So they want to, cover cases that can be explained, but stay away from the ones that can't be, so that people will think there's no mystery. And the conclusions, the most important page for me to have shown you, I somehow screwed up and didn't have a copy of it on the thing. And I've got the report here. Anybody can come up and look at it. But the panel made two recommendations to the CIA, which is basically a recommendation to all the intelligence community, giving them license to do what they suggest. And the recommendation was that the national security agencies take immediate steps to strip the unidentified flying objects of the special status they have been given and the aura of mystery they have unfortunately acquired. And we suggest that these aims may be achieved by an integrated program designed to reassure the public of the total lack of evidence of inimical forces behind the phenomena. So basically, the CIA advised the rest of the government and the intelligence community to debunk the phenomena and to use the media to do that. Basically gave license to the intelligence community to infiltrate the media, to influence the media. It's supposed to be a free press, right? This could very well be, and the fact that it's in black and white is quite astonishing. We don't know to what extent they actually implemented this, but just very quickly, there's this one letter written from one of the members of the Robertson Panel a number of years later to another one. And he says he helped organize the CBS TV show around the Robertson Panel conclusions. So there you have at least proof of one television show in which the Robertson Panel conclusions, which is to debunk UFOs, was actually put into action, and these individuals somehow managed to influence CBS. And there's countless accounts of this happening over and over again. There's a book called The Missing Times by Terry Hansen, which is an excellent book that deals with nothing but an analysis of the role of the intelligence community and the CIA in the media, coverage of UFOs, and I'd be happy to write anybody down that book. It's really, really good. Just very briefly, and then we're going to take a break. So I think the Robertson Panel kind of got the whole ridicule thing going, and we don't know to what extent, as I said, it was actually operative, but it looks like it was quite operative. So the whole thing was set up in the 50s. The ridicule was injected in various ways, and the other problem was the Condon Report and Blue Book, both these, I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but these very official studies, one by the Air Force, one by the University of Colorado, both put out conclusions in '69 which said that this subject was not worthy of scientific study, basically, in a nutshell. And there's all kinds of reasons why they did that, and there's been excellent studies done about the bias and the preconceived ideas and all the factors that went into it, and false press releases, and on and on and on. But the bottom line is these had a devastating effect on people's willingness to take the subject seriously. And because the resources for scientists were then cut off, there's nothing for the media to really look at. The scientists have to be putting out papers and publishing papers and figuring out what this is for them to give something of substance to the media, and there was nothing there. So this allows the media to believe that there's just nothing to this. It's just not serious. Why should we take it seriously? These two reports came out. And of course, what these reports, the most important thing, and the mainstream media, the big papers, are basically mouthpieces for the U.S. government. They get their information from the government. They get their press releases and their briefings. If there's no official acknowledgement of this phenomena, the Washington Post is not going to believe there's anything to it. I mean, that's the bottom line. Unless there's some courageous reporter that goes out and decides to investigate it independently, which is what investigative journalists are supposed to do. They don't do that much anymore. You know, just take it on. You know, it doesn't matter what the government says. It doesn't work that way, especially now. You know, we got the 911 thing. It's much worse. But without official acknowledgement, and which we, of course, everybody knows we don't have. The government says they don't exist, and they're not, you know, there's nothing to it. You know, most journalists just aren't going to take it seriously, unfortunately, except for the maverick types. And there aren't too many of those. Another thing I learned very quickly in trying to get people to publish my stories is they just simply aren't educated. I mean, I don't blame these people for not taking the subject seriously. All they've seen are tabloids, you know, a couple of movies, Independence Day or something like that, maybe some documentaries on TV that are part fact and part fiction. And they don't know that there's anything to this. And how are they to know that? The only way they're going to know that is if they take some time to look into it. And most of them are not willing to do that. They don't have the time to do that. They're not assigned by their editors to do that. And they're not going to do it. So lack of education is the primary. And so, you know, therefore they just stay with that ridicule that's already been put through the media and is already part of their consciousness for the reasons we've talked about. And of course, these journalists, they feel like they got to be in part of the bandwagon. If everybody thinks it's silly, well, they got to think that way too, or they'll be thought, people will think they're weird. They got to preserve their jobs. They can't take any risks. And I also believe that the fear of the unknown, and you know, the ones that may have a little sense of that maybe there's something kind of curious about this, there may be a fear of the unknown. This is what Jacques Vallée thinks is very significant, that the fear of the unknown and the implications of the phenomena are scary to people. It threatens the way they look at the world. And certain people within the media may very well have that problem. And the way to deal with that is to ridicule it. It keeps it away from you. You don't have to deal with it. You don't have to ask yourself, could this possibly be true, you know, and what does it mean? It's scary. It's a huge shift in your perspective, and they don't want to, people are threatened by that. And the other problem, of course, is, and this is a more controversial area, but you know, it's become a cultural phenomenon. There's a lot of people out there who call themselves experts in the field who aren't really experts. There's a lot of information coming through that's not accurate. We all know about the little green men with the big eyes and the Roswell Museum, and all this stuff is fine on a cultural level, but in terms of the work I'm trying to do and in terms of trying to get credibility for it, it just doesn't work, and it actually has a negative effect. And sometimes I feel like, you know, the UFO community could probably, if it wanted to become a little more serious and a little more self-regulating, it would help. But, you know, that's just my perspective as a journalist. It doesn't mean there's anything invalid about this stuff. And putting out information to the mainstream that they're just not ready for yet. I mean, when you have people that don't even accept that there's objects in the sky, and you start talking about alien abductions, you just have to go like A, B, C, D. And you have to have a sense of what's going to fly with these people and what isn't. And this is if you're doing what I'm doing and you're trying to reach a certain audience. I'm not saying that everybody's doing that, and therefore I'm not saying nobody should talk about it. But the challenge I face is being very discerning about what they can handle and what they can't, and kind of going in, you know, maybe if we can get them to accept that there's objects, then maybe we can go to step B. But, you know, we're dealing with people here that know nothing and don't think there's anything to this. So anyway, those are just some of the reasons that I believe there is a ridicule factor, and it's a huge a mountain of a huge wall that we're up against. So I think we're going to take a break now, and when we come back, I'm going to talk about some of the work I've been doing the last year with the initiative that the Sci-Fi Channel has been sponsoring, and then we'll have a good discussion. Okay, so what are we going to do? Break for 10 minutes? Okay.
Okay. How's the PA working for everybody back there? Can you hear it back row? Leslie speaking, is it? Can you hear back there, Art? Your mic is on. Hello. Art, Leslie speaking, can you hear everybody back there? Is that okay? Okay, I'm getting the ISIS. I'm just going to put my own plug in for Terry Hanson's book. When I met Terry Hanson about a year ago at a conference, he gave us 6 copies of these books, and at that time he said that there was only 600 copies of this book at all. I hope that by this time there's a few more, but this book is very, very significant if you're interested in what the Robertson Panel and the CIA have to say about what's in our media regarding the UFO subject. Quickly, I just want to give Leslie's website. It's www.freedomofinfo.org, all one word, freedomofinfo.org. And I think our webmaster can put that link on our site soon, so you can get it there, freedomofinfo.org. Maybe it's already there, is it? Do you know? No. Probably not. Okay. So we're going to go another 20 minutes or so and show one more videotape, and then we'll open it up for questions. And this is the first time we're going to try something new with regard to that. We're trying to make a good videotape of this presentation. So I'd like for people with questions to come up here and use the microphone. Deal? So in other words, please don't ask questions from your seats. Please come up here and we'll get them recorded for the tape. Okay? All right. Leslie Kean.
Okay. Thanks. So I'm just going to kind of finish the saga of what I've been doing, and then we'll have a discussion. But about last summer, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Sci-Fi Channel's kind of advocacy campaign that they're doing to try to get information released about UFOs. Doesn't look like you are. Do any of you know about the Sci-Fi Channel? People, okay. So they've sort of taken on the UFO issue the way that a corporation might sort of take on some kind of public service thing, and I know the Animal Planet channel does work with, trying to get animals treated humanely, and sometimes corporations take on a cause. And about a year ago, the Sci-Fi Channel decided to try to facilitate and support the effort to bring credibility to this issue and to get information released about it. And it's exciting because they have some muscle, they have money, and they have some power. And so I began as a consultant to them about a year ago because they wanted somebody who was objective to help kind of guide them through the morass of the UFO scene and figure out who all the players were and all of that. And then they asked, so one of the projects they wanted to take on was a Freedom of Information Act effort that they would put resources out to take it further than any effort has ever been able to go before. And they asked me to spearhead that effort and to select a case, and we all chipped in on selecting a case, but the case that I recommended they take on, and they all decided to do it, was this case of a crash of something in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania in 1965. And something came down in Pennsylvania, in the woods. It was an object that, the people who saw it on the ground all reported the same object. This is what an artist's drawing looks like of it. It's kind of unusual. It's not your standard disc. It's an acorn-shaped thing, about 8 feet high. And it came down in the woods, and the military came out in droves and cordoned off the area, kept the public away. This was covered on sightings. Some people might have seen it on sightings in the early 90s. Different people in the area, firefighters came on the scene. There were about 3 or 4 people that saw it on the ground and actually independently reported it to the investigator on the case. His name is Stan Gordon. He's been researching and investigating and collecting information on this case since it happened in 1965, so we're talking more than 30 years. And the two people in particular who saw it didn't know each other, had never met, didn't know anything about what anybody else knew, and they took Stan to the exact location. It was the same in both cases, and described the object, and it was the same. And there's a couple other people that have come forward also. So there was this huge, hundreds of military. I mean, some people described guns being pointed at them to keep them away. There was a radio show that was that night, that was produced that night. A radio reporter went out and covered a lot of what was going on, and he had visits in his station by government officials. And a number of people also finally, after hours of the woods being cordoned off, saw something on the back of a flatbed truck being carted away at 1 o'clock in the morning, shaped like this acorn. So there was a huge group of civilians and firefighters and newspaper reporters that saw this. And the newspaper articles, I should have brought one, but anyway, there were newspaper articles that described the incident that night. So the Air Force has said that nothing came down that night. And we have the documents from Project Blue Book, which was the official Air Force investigation into UFOs, the one that I mentioned earlier that closed in '69. One of their cases, this one was documented in Blue Book, and they claim that they sent their folks out and they didn't find anything. So that's the story. And we decided that we were going to go for this case, partly because it involves a physical object, which we're very interested in because this is solid evidence. It's a material object. There are lots of living witnesses to the case. It hasn't been solved. It's not well known. It doesn't have all the trappings of the Roswell case, you know, a lot of commercialism and cultural overlay and disinformation, all of that. It's sort of this uncontaminated case that this one person has done a gorgeous job on, and that was the other factor why we chose it. This person, Stan Gordon in Pennsylvania, has done a meticulous job of researching and documenting the case. Affidavits from dozens and dozens of witnesses, et cetera. So the Sci-Fi Channel has provided a law firm in Washington who are experts on FOIA to work with me on a FOIA initiative. That's the first step. You know, and we didn't expect to get anything. Stan has already done a lot of FOIA work on it, but we're taking it farther than he was ever able to because he's just one person. And a law firm is expensive. So anyway, we've been through a whole round, about 15 different government agencies, and haven't received anything. NASA, however, I mean, I won't tell you a lot of detail because you can go on my website and read more about it. But NASA has denied us documents that we know for a fact they have. Some of them have already been released, and we want to get more. The preliminary aspects of them have been released already. They denied that they have those. They've denied us documents about an individual who we know was an employee of NASA at the time and who worked with Project Moondust, which was the operation that did retrievals and collected debris that comes from space. We have since filed an appeal with NASA because of this, and that document is actually on the website. You all can read it if you want. Written by this attorney. It's really a brilliant document. They've written back that they are going to do another search for us. We are going to litigate this if they continue to deny us documents, and we're not, you know, we're asking for some things that could be very significant. So what's unprecedented here is that the resources are being provided by the Sci-Fi Channel for this to go to court if it has to, for us to do whatever it takes to push the FOIA part into the courts. And even if we don't get the case solved, or it's still going to draw attention to it, and it's going to do it in a way that's extremely credible, and it's going to show the world that, you know, that this is being taken seriously.
Have you said what FOIA means?
Yeah, the Freedom of Information Act. Everybody knows that that's FOIA is the abbreviation for that, and that's the law that was passed in the 60s that allows civilians, thank you, Abby, to write their government and request documents. And after 25 years, documents are supposed to be declassified unless they're of national security concern. This was more than 25 years ago. None of the denials said that there was any national security concern. We believe that there couldn't possibly be after all this time. If this was a Russian vehicle, one possibility is that this was a Russian space probe of some sort that our government took, and they weren't supposed to. They were supposed to give it back to Russia, so they don't want anybody to know they have it, right? But we believe that after all this time, they can let it be known. Part of the urgency of this case, too, is the community in Pennsylvania. It's just really fascinating. It's this tiny little rural community. Those people have been so torn apart by the lack of resolution to this case. There are families that have broken up over this, because there's contingents that say that nothing happened, and there are those that say something did happen. The ones that say it didn't happen are not very many, but they're there. And there's all this infighting. It's a tiny little town, you know, and there's all this infighting and nastiness that's going on. It's very petty, and it's had a very devastating effect on the community. So I believe that people have a right to that information for all those reasons. Did somebody have a question over there? Or can we wait till the end? Because I'm going to lose my...
It just looks like something from Kean from back in the 60s.
Well, it may be that there have been other objects seen that look the same. And I'd like to know actually more about that. Maybe we can talk about that. But so not only has the Sci-Fi Channel provided this law firm, but they've also provided a professional research, archival research firm in Washington that can do much more than the Freedom of Information Act request can ever do, which is they can go to all these record centers, they know how to get documents declassified, they know the whole process of acquiring classified documents that's more than any citizen could ever do. So I'm also working with them, and we have a private investigator who used to be with the General Accounting Office, which is the investigative branch of the Congress, who is digging up names, finding people for us, finding people that were in the military, finding the Air Force people that actually went and searched for the object. And I've had the opportunity to interview a number of those people, and they've never spoken to anybody before about what happened that night. And it's very interesting because the contradictions between what they say and what the people say are growing. Either they're lying, or another theory is they might have gone to the wrong location, the Air Force. It's complex. But the contradiction between the official line and the line of the people in Pennsylvania is so severe that, you know, there has to be a resolution to it. Last fall, we did so I kind of went out as a journalist. The Sci-Fi Channel did this press conference in Washington, D.C., and what was really exciting about it was we had John Podesta speak out on our behalf. He supported this initiative, this effort to try to solve the Kecksburg case. He was President Clinton's chief of staff. I don't know if many of you recognize the name. He is an advocate for freedom of information, and when he was in office, he made all kinds of reforms in the freedom of information laws and got millions of documents released. And he just believes very deeply in the people's right to information. The other component of this effort is a public relations firm. I forgot to mention that when I told you all the people involved. A major public relations firm in Washington called Podesta Mattoon, which is run by John Podesta's brother. They are dealing with other aspects of this investigation. So anyway, I just want you to show you the kind of caliber of person that has come out in support of this. And what we're trying to, all the principles I talked to you about earlier about trying to bring credibility to this issue, that's the way we are handling this initiative. You know, to just say it in a way, present it in a way that it can be taken seriously by anybody, no matter how skeptical they are. So Jordan's I want you to see what John Podesta was like at this press conference. We're going to show you a little clip of what he had to say. Go ahead, Jordan.
The right to speak and the right to print without the right to know are pretty empty. So I believe that the notion of open government, freedom of information, the fundamental tenets of the Freedom of Information Act are really part and parcel of our First Amendment rights. I think it's time to open the books on questions that have remained in the dark, on the question of government investigations of UFOs. It's time to find out what the truth really is that's out there. We ought to do it really because it's right. We ought to do it because the American people, quite frankly, can handle the truth. And we ought to do it because it's the law. So there are these cases in which documents haven't been made available to the American public. The American public, as Bonnie noted, is quite skeptical about the fact that the government won't make them available for public inspection. These are records that are more than 25 years old. They ought to be declassified, they ought to be released, and we ought to be able to see for ourselves what's included in those documents.
I think that people need to know, first of all, that cut it. This phenomenon. You don't need to see that because you've already heard it all. The other thing that happened at the same time as this press conference was we started a group called the Coalition for Freedom of Information, which I co-founded that group, and that's kind of an alliance of people that are trying to do the kind of thing we've been talking about. So really I've expanded beyond the journalism. This is more of a kind of a advocacy group and it's got three goals: to bring scientific credibility to the UFO issue, to bring congressional interest and congressional action, and to encourage serious media coverage. And so we're working on all those things. And this public relations firm that I mentioned to you is making some serious progress within the Congress, which we're very excited about. And hopefully something will come of that. This is just to show you that when you present an issue in the right way, in the way we did it at that press conference, you're going to get serious media coverage. We've got quite a bit of media coverage for our work, and none of it has ridiculed us. So the press conference was, and of course having John Podesta helped a lot. I don't know if they would have even showed up without him, but this was an article that CNN did, just to give you a sense that it talked about the effort in the Kecksburg case and what John Podesta had to say about it. So that I guess I have a copy here if anybody wants to read it afterwards. And another thing that, so that investigation is underway. All these different components, all these professional people are working on it thanks to the Sci-Fi Channel providing the resources to make that possible. Another, along the line, I mentioned one of our goals being to bring scientific credibility to the issue. We put on this symposium at George Washington University last November, Interstellar Travel and Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, Science Fiction or Science Fact. And we brought together a number of very distinguished panel. It was moderated by Ray Suarez of the McNeil NewsHour with Jim Lair, maybe you're familiar with that. And these are Michio Kaku, some of you may know, he's a famous physicist, writes these fabulous books, has a great radio show, and he's not a UFO guy, but he came on to talk to everybody about how it is conceivable through modern physics can't explain how something could get here from there, which is the argument lots of people use. They can't get here from there. We got the speed of light and all that. He is able to explain eloquently how that is no longer possible, and that physics can explain that it is possible. So that was the role that he played, and we had a professor of astrophysics from Johns Hopkins. He also did the big picture, and then these other people are people that have studied the issue. Jacques Vallée was also there. For some reason, his name isn't on that list. But I thought my opinion was that this was a historic event because of the way the issue was being presented and the credibility that it brought to it. And it did get a very good article in the Washington Post. Remember I told you about the Washington Post? It's like they're government mouthpieces and they don't cover this stuff. Well, they covered this event, and a few weeks later they did this in-depth article, and it was excellent. It was about basically the science that the scientists were talking about, but it used our conference as a sort of a jumping off point. So I think it just goes to show that if you get it out there, and this again was sponsored by the Sci-Fi Channel, they made the resources available for this to happen. These kinds of things are really hard to do because they're expensive. And so I'm very excited about this I think this is somewhat of an unprecedented effort that we're involved with now because of the work that they are doing. There's a lot of other projects they're doing. I'm not involved with all of them, but they are producing a documentary about the Kecksburg investigation, which is going to be coming out in the fall. And conferences and other projects that are being lined up. I just wanted you to get a look at that. And Jordan has the tape of that full, as a video, it was a 4-hour event, that scientific panel. There's a long Q&A section. If anybody wants to look at it, Jordan has copies. There's also a half-hour edited version if you just want to see kind of clips of it that the Sci-Fi Channel produced and put on the late-night TV. Only late night. It was for people like us who really care, not for the general public, you know. And anyway, so this is just the last story that I did last fall. I guess it was in December. I kind of wrote a story about freedom of this was an op-ed piece, actually. It's getting harder and harder to do regular articles as a freelancer. And so, you have to get more and more into the op-ed thing. And so I had to do, it's the way it works. So this was kind of, I used Taken and you have to have a hook. If they call a news hook, you have this thing that when Taken, it was this big 2-week extravaganza that Steven Spielberg produced that was on Sci-Fi Channel. So, and then I was able to write about the effort that we're doing with Kecksburg and the fact that John Podesta has come forward and other related issues. And this went out on the Knight Ridder, which is a wire service, and it got picked up many, many places, probably, I don't know, a couple of dozen at least, places all over the country. Here's another version of it. The papers always write their own headlines and do their own graphics. And I have there was one paper that did like a whole page, and 2/3 of it was a bug-eyed alien head, And then my article, sort of like what they did on Larry King. You have no control over that, unfortunately, with an op-ed piece anyway. So I think, I don't know what else. I think maybe we should just have a discussion. I'm sure there's. Oh, I just want to also talk about the Roper poll, just so that, and then we'll end this. That last September, the Sci-Fi Channel commissioned a poll by Roper, the polling service, and they discovered that 72% of the American public believe that the government is hiding information about UFOs. That's 3/4 of the population. And 56% believe that UFOs are real. So how many issues are there that have that kind of public concern and appeal that the media won't cover? Anyway, so that's where we're at. And let's just have a discussion, and anybody who wants more information, wants to read in the articles or anything, can go to my website, which is freedomofinfo.org, and everything is there.
Please come up to the microphone if you have questions for Leslie.
I hope I can answer them. I'm not an expert, and I'm not a researcher on UFOs. I'm a journalist. So,
Leslie, great
yeah.
presentation.
Thanks.
Do you think, from your own perspective and research and approaches, that there's evidence for the continuation of a committee either equal to or an offshoot of the original MJ-12 today? Have you come across that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously information that's being withheld, and somebody's withholding it. So it makes sense to me that there is some kind of a group within the government that's got control. I mean, I think that's probably the case from every people I've talked to, from all the reading I've done, which is probably the same material that you all have read. I don't have any way of verifying it, except, you know, people tell me they've been into the meetings, you know, like Edgar Mitchell and Stephen Greer have been into meetings with Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they can't get information. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there is some kind of group that controls the information. But, you know, I probably don't know anything more about that than anybody else, really. The approach we're taking, too, with my Coalition for Freedom of Information and this effort in Washington is to try to not accuse the government of being bad. You know, you have a cover-up. We're trying to encourage them to want to work with us. So we're taking a more positive stand, which is, hey, look, we've got this data here that scientists need to analyze. You know, can we give them some resources? You know, this is you know, we've got something going on here, and we think that you would like to work with us, and we invite you to. And it's like, it's a different approach, you know, when you accuse them of something, and then they call you a conspiracy theorist, and then it's, you're out of the game, so. But that doesn't mean you're not right about the cover-up. It's just what I'm trying to do, it doesn't really, doesn't work that well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. One thing that I really resonate with you, and I learned it through the Iraq War, is that the media is controlled in some direction by the government.
Right.
And without that, I may not even believe that. So there is revelations happening. I'm a real skeptic because I want to believe. I want to believe in God. I want to believe in Jesus, and I want to believe in everything. But unless I have a personal experience, I can't fake it to myself. Is there anything you can help me with so that I can be a believer like all these other people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you need to have your own experience to be a quotes believer.
It's hard for me not.
Yeah, and it's not even really an issue of belief because there's solid data that you cannot say you don't believe it when you look at it. I mean, the data is there. The problem is accessing the right information, taking the time to look at it. You know, you won't necessarily come away believing that they're ET. There's no proof of that they're extraterrestrial, but that something phenomenal like those descriptions I showed in the beginning of the craft, that they're demonstrating qualities. Now, we're talking in the 50s. We didn't have the technology in the 50s. There's no question. We didn't have the technology to do what government documents show us these things we're doing in the sky. That's a fact.
Have you had any personal experience? Like,
No,
have you?
I haven't. And it's probably a good thing that I haven't. But so one thing, I mean, I would encourage you to if you wanted to go to the website freedomofinfo.org, there's links and information on there that might help you.
Thank you very much for what you're doing. You're sticking your neck out on the line for a lot of us. I have a question about a different type of aerial phenomenon, and it's around here a lot, and it's very big dearth of it in the paper, and that's chemtrails.
Oh, yeah.
We see it, there's a lot of it in Medford, very obvious grids. It seems like they've stopped for the past month. It's seasonal, but and people are seeing it. It's playing in the nose on your face, and you're not reading a thing about it.
I don't know anything about it. I mean, I think it's of great concern, and I can't speak to it. Maybe somebody else here can. I mean,
what's with the press not touching it?
It's a good question. You know, it's the same problem. So somebody needs to we need some journalists to take on that issue. There is a journalist that's been studying the chemtrail issue. Maybe, I forget his name.
Thomas?
Yeah.
Will Thomas and Clifford.
Will Thomas.
And Clifford Carnicom.
But they don't.
You can read up all about it.
Yeah. So again, it's the internet, but I sure don't know anything about that. It's scary, though. Hi.
Hi, Leslie. Did anybody take a picture of that crop circle that was by San Francisco?
Yeah, there are investigators out there that have taken pictures of it.
Can we
And there
see
was
it?
also one in the Chronicle.
It was in the Chronicle?
If you go on the
And is it
Chronicle
on
website.
The website?
sfgate.com.
Okay.
They have in that article that I was describing to you that was so atrocious, they had a very nice aerial shot. I don't think it showed the whole thing, but it showed most of it. It was large.
Can you give a description?
Well, I think it had like, oh God, I wish I'd brought a picture, but there's three big circles on one end and then a couple of groups of little threes around it, and there's a stem, and then there's another really big circle on the other end. So I was there.
It's not one of the ones that are faked, or do
Oh,
you
we
know,
have no
or
idea. It's quite possible that it was.
Was anybody out there investigating
Oh yeah,
it?
there are investigators out there, and
Great.
the BLT research group in Cambridge, which is the best crop circle study group, they are kind of overseeing the local investigation. So, but I'm not sure if they've really found signs of many anomalies in the crop circle so far. So it's quite possible that it's hoaxed or that we'll never know. Part of the problem was that hordes of people came in. It was really easy to get to it, trampled all over it. And so I think it made it harder to...
There's two of them. There's one nobody knows about.
Yeah, but nobody knows about it, James, so we're not supposed to talk about it. I know you can't resist, but...
Nobody knows where it is.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Leslie.
Sure.
Question for you. In all the research you've done, have you ever run across any information about or learned anything about the credibility of that Colonel Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell? That seemed like that was full of a lot of evidence. And
I mean, all I can tell you is what people tell me. It's all hearsay.
Okay.
So take it with a grain of salt. I mean, I know some people believe that parts of that book are questionable, and that his... and there may be other people in this audience, like Art. He probably knows more about it than I do. Go ahead, because
I doubt that I know much more than you do.
I mean, it's just a matter of opinion.
But I have been doing some work on Corso's material, and there's a general feeling among higher echelon UFO investigators that the gentleman named Burns, who co-authored it with him, or we've cooperated with him on the book, put a lot of words in his mouth.
Right.
And now I don't share that feeling, because he said some things that I have investigated that were absolutely 100% true.